Hello and welcome to the Boston Herald podcast. My name is Harold Lapidus, and my special guest today is author, journalist, concert promoter, and fellow graduate of Islip High School, Mr. Seth Rogovoy. Among his many accomplishments are writing two great books, the Essential Klezmer from 2000 and Bob Dylan, Prophet, Mystic, Poet from 2009. And which is an exploration of Bob Dylan's Jewish roots. Did you know he was Jewish? And he's recently secured a deal to write a book about George Harrison titled "Within You, Without You," and that's pretty exciting. And we'll get to that a little bit later. And Seth's interests in klezmer and Yiddish music has led to promoting the Yidstock Festival. He also has his own Rogovoy report. It's like an email news service, a compendium of cultural news and observations, as it says on there, since I subscribe. He has a Substack account, and he hosts many online programs on many different subjects on various platforms. So he's a busy guy. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to me.
Not too busy to talk to you anytime, Harold.
I've been an admirer of Seth's writing since we were both at the same high school, and we had the Buccaneer, which was the newspaper. Probably every week it came out, or whenever it came out. And the only thing I ever read in it, I'm pretty sure, was Seth's music reviews, which are very sophisticated. And he had his own voice even then, and he didn't go along with the crowd. He even ruffled some feathers, which was some of my favorite parts. And he's continued to write to this day, and he's done plenty of writing. And so and there's a George Harrison book coming up, and we have plenty to talk about. So welcome to the podcast, Seth.
Thank you, Harold. It's great to be here.
How are you doing during these trying times?
Well, do we really want to get into that? I mean, I'm hanging in there,
We're used to it. Thousands of years of it. But you got a dog. That's pretty exciting.
I did get a dog, and people ask me, was that a pandemic puppy? And we got it during the pandemic, but we had planned to get it before anybody ever heard of COVID. So you decide whether or not that makes it a pandemic puppy.
What's the dog's name?
Kiki.
Kiki.
And there's an interesting story behind why we named her Kiki.
All right.
Kiki was Ruth Bader Ginsburg's childhood nickname.
Ah.
And the Justice Bader Ginsburg died just about a month or two before we got our dog. But even before we got the dog, we decided we would name, if she was a female, we would name her Kiki. Maybe if she was a boy too, I don't know. Who knows?
So let's start near the beginning. So what are your earliest memories of music that you liked, records that you bought, concerts that you saw, that type of thing?
Interesting. Well, I grew up. I was born in 1960, so I grew up at that time, and so my earliest musical experiences were the records that my parents had. A lot of Broadway soundtracks. I heard Jewish music in synagogue, and my grandfather was a cantor, and he used to sing around the house all the time, and I loved his singing. That always really meant a lot to me, and it really touched me in a way. When I was very young, when I was 5 years old, I'd ask him to sing. My parents were not hip or groovy people, but they did have a couple of records in their collection. I think actually my grandmother, the wife of the cantor, she gave me the soundtrack to A Hard Day's Night. So that was pretty cool. So I remember that, and my mother had a copy of Bringing It All Back Home, which was an album many of you won't have never heard of that, but it was by a guy named Bob Dylan in the mid 1960s, early to mid 1960s.
Mhm.
And she also had a couple of albums by this group named Cream, and the less said about them, the better, especially these days.
So these days. Um,
I remember trying to listen to those records, and
never
I never
did it
liked
for
them.
you. No.
No,
Even
no,
you're
no.
on the cutting edge of not being into Eric Clapton.
Yeah.
And I know
So
you.
that was my earliest musical
Mhm.
memories, you know. Then remember when I was 12 or 13 years old, relatives got me a little, console, one-piece stereo
Mhm.
is what we call them then. I don't know what to call them now because nobody has them now. Hi-fi system, and they gave it to me with a few records.
Mhm.
I didn't really have any musical taste at that time, much of my own. Um, and among those early records were a Seals and Crofts record and a John Denver record and a new Riders of the Purple Sage album,
Mhm.
which I never liked. And there was one other album that came into my so I did have a groovy aunt and uncle, and and he was Greek, so he was like that was my early introduction to Cat Stevens because
Mhm.
he was a Greek Cypriot and Cat Stevens was one of his parents was a Greek Cypriot. So Seals and Crofts and Cat Stevens and John Denver a little bit were like my early 70s, just coming of age uh, musical uh, enthusiasms until I got a little bit wiser and more discerning in my musical taste,
And
which didn't take long. Didn't it was just a few years later.
yeah, once you hit that, once you get the bug, it's like I had a $1 a week allowance, and I would save up and I would just buy things like whatever money I had just went to buying records. Go to
You
the.
know, the big purchase I made, which changed everything, was in early 1974, I guess. I was in a record store with my dad, and I'd heard about Bob Dylan, and there was this. My mom had a friend who would bring his guitar over, and he would play a lot of his own songs, but he would play some Bob. He would always talk about Dylan and play Dylan. Anyway, I was in the record store. Dylan had a brand new album called Planet Waves, and I took a chance on. I thought, okay, I'll get it, and I'll really see. And that was everything. My life began when I
That
brought
your
that
musical bar
album.
mitzvah was that day.
Yeah. And, looking back on it, I just was thinking recently, it's not surprising that I got first of all, that album in particular was great because, it had that kind of laid back, funky, rootsy feel because he recorded it with the band, really the only studio album he recorded with the band. And it was pretty easy to play. I started playing guitar around the same time, and it was pretty easy to play along with most of those songs, or just to play a little leads or a little mandolin along with it. But just the timing for you and I, because we're approximately the same age. Um, if you weren't there for bringing it all back home, Highway 61 and Blonde on Blonde, the second most amazing period started with Planet Waves, because within a matter of 2.5 years, you had Planet Waves, the Before the Flood live album, which I totally dug and loved, Blood on the Tracks, Desire, and on and that run of albums right there, that was like my time, my introduction to Dylan. And how many periods are there really where you can, where he equaled that? I think it was really just that mid 60s period and that, mid 70s period, which were, there was lots of great stuff all over for the last 60 years almost. but that period, I'm so glad that I had open ears. I had a guitar. These songs were all very guitar oriented, acoustic guitar, and they were brilliant. So that's a long answer to a short question.
And and among the legendary shows you saw was the CW Post show in 1975, where there's I don't know if that started your interest in religious music.
Well,
But
it was pretty.
you want to talk about that show?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So that guy I mentioned, he was like a younger friend of my mother's. My mom went back to college, as an adult. So she met some younger people, and this guy who came around with his guitar. So, one afternoon or late afternoon, he pulls up and he says, "Hey, come on, I'm taking you to a concert." I'm like, what? And he drives, I don't even think it was probably less than an hour away, to CW Post College on Long Island. And I'm sure he told me what it was, and I was aware of the artist beforehand. But it turned out to be a Bruce Springsteen concert. And
just to put it in perspective, this was the same year as Born to Run came out.
Born to Run had just come out,
right?
A month or two before. So he was still playing colleges. This is before he exploded. So what I got to hear was a Springsteen on the verge, this emerging artist who played a 4-hour show, jumped on and off the piano, who played a million covers. Most of the music I didn't really know, but it was so exciting and so gripping. And you've all heard the live version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. So this was, in November, I think the concert was. That was the concert where it was recorded, because and that was like a highlight of the show, because it was such a cool arrangement. So that was pretty great. That was one of my earliest shows. Although I also saw Patti Smith, because the same year Patti Smith's Horses came out, which I also totally dug. Although it was a little scary for a 15-year-old boy from Long Island. I didn't know what to make of it, but I really liked it. And I saw her. It was the same thing. Michael came by the house. He was like, "Okay, let's go to Hofstra. Let's go to Hofstra this time." And we went and saw Patti Smith.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some really early. Now I had seen other concerts too. I must admit, I had seen James Taylor. I had seen Seals and Crofts a whole bunch of times.
Already?
Yeah. It was my introduction to concerts. Yep. And I actually went so much that the tour manager recognized me. And I remember, like, a friend and I we were up in Western Massachusetts for the summer, and they were playing at the Springfield Civic Center. And we didn't have tickets, but we were going to get them. We just drove to Springfield, and we were just walking around the Civic Center looking for the box office. And the guy walks out, and it's like, "Al." And he's like, "Seth?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you have tickets?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "Well, here's a couple of pairs, and here's a pair of tickets, and here's a backstage pass for after the show."
Wow.
So I even got to meet them.
Wow.
Several times, actually.
And a rock critic was born.
that was it. I knew this was the life for me. Unfortunately, I missed out on two of the greatest Bob Dylan tours, I think both of which you did not miss out on. That was, of course, the 74 tour with the band, which you saw at Nassau Coliseum, I believe. And I missed out on Rolling Thunder. And I guess you saw the Night of the Hurricane, right?
Yeah.
at Madison Square Garden. So I did not see Bob Dylan live, and you know very well when and where this was because you got me the tickets, at the Boston Garden in 1978. So Dylan fans will know what it is that I heard. And, for for my first Dylan show to be on that tour, there were many good things you could say about the 78 tour, but it wasn't, well, clearly, I can't say it wasn't what I expected because, I knew I'd read all about what was going on, but, it was a little weird with all the singers on stage and the huge band with the horns, and didn't know what to make
crystal
of it.
Clear Boston Garden sound system.
And that, that was unbelievable. But somebody, I won't say who, actually I think it was me, probably you too. We probably both did the same thing. We did record it to a cassette recorder, and we're able to listen to it over and over again, however bad it was. So you could get through that horrible echo and focus on what we had heard. And then, of course, in just a few years after that, when I actually became a professional rock critic, then I saw Dylan. I don't know, at this point, probably 75 or 100 times over the course of the years.
45 years? Is that 55? I don't know. Something like that.
A lot of years.
Let me get my calculator out. I think we both had the same thing. At the time, it was like we were baffled by it. Most people that I got tickets for, I don't think anyone thought it was great. A lot of people were disappointed. I think we both look back at it as a great show. Or, certainly, we got it now. We just, at the time, is not, as you said, is not what we wanted.
Right. I loved, one of the things that really stood out at that concert was he played Stepchild. And the only reason I knew that is because from listening over and over, this was an unknown song. He hadn't recorded it. On Buddha Can, remember, he says, this is an unrecorded song. See if you can guess which one it is. Because Street Legal hadn't come out yet, and he played "Is Your Love in Vain" when they recorded the Budokan show.
Right, yeah.
Anyway.
And what about were you influenced by? Did you get the music magazines that were around, or what? Did any particular writers or magazines influence you?
Well, there's three really that early on really made me interested in rock criticism, in addition to playing music and listening and going and talking about it. And that, the daily newspaper on Long Island at the time, I don't know if it still is, it was Newsday.
It's still around, I think. Yeah.
And Newsday had this amazing slew of critics writing for them. The first one was Robert Christgau, who I think was also already writing for the Village Voice. So he was a regular reviewer. And I remember reading his reviews of Springsteen. I also remember corresponding with him because, of course, he wrote some negative reviews of Seals and Crofts and Cat Stevens. So I wrote to him, and he wrote back. Remember, we had these typed letters to each other. He's very nice. To take the time to do that. And then after him, it was Dave Marsh. Who went on to work with Springsteen and to write about, and I think, become part of Springsteen Inc. And then after that, it was Wayne Robbins, who, I still love reading his work to this day. And Chris Gow's also. So that was just Newsday. The other two were Rolling Stone magazine. And, I was reading it since the early 70s. So all the great critics back then, Grail Marcus, and, Hunter Thompson, not that he was the music critic, but it was, the great years of that magazine taking music very seriously. and the Village Voice out of New York City. So most of those are. I mean, I read everything. I understood almost nothing, but it was intriguing, and it made me want to
Right.
be a
To
part of
dig
that.
deeper. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, how do you think the role of music journalism has changed since back then and to the way it is today?
It's a great question, and I don't really know the answer because I don't even know what. I mean, I find music journalism today in different places, but it's not in newspapers the way it was. I mean, the New York Times a number of years ago, the Boston Globe gave up doing concert reviews. I believe so. I mean, I never see them.
Yeah.
I think almost all daily newspapers just don't do that anymore, which was kind of weird. I mean, that was one of the best parts for my run as a critic at the Berkshire Eagle. My 16-year run, was largely out 2, 3, 4 times a week, writing about either the local folk singer or the big concerts at the in Albany, New York City, and Boston, and in the Berkshires. Tanglewood had a lot of big shows, still does. I've seen Dylan there a bunch of times. So anyway, your question about how it's changed. So I obviously later on I started reading Spin magazine, and I know there's some good online music magazines now. I guess Pitchfork. So I see some of that stuff. Wayne Robbins and Robert Christgau have Substacks that I subscribe to, so I read about music through them. Mark Myers has a great column that he does in the Wall Street Journal, mostly about old music, but stuff that means a lot to me. But I don't know. What do you think? Is there rock journalism like there used to be?
No, well,
is there rock music like
well, well, the first thing that comes to mind is the difference also between England and the US, or the UK and the US, which is in the UK, it was essential because they had very little radio exposure or television exposure, and you'd get at one point there was the NME, and there was Melody Maker, and there was Sounds, and they would be out every week, and they were very cheap, and they would write about music, and that's how you found out about it for the most part, and that was very important. They got a little I think influenced by Cream, where they became very irreverent when punk happened, and they championed punk even though it didn't particularly sell. I mean, I thought every Sex Pistols and Jam and Clash album, I thought every single would go to #1. It's not, it wasn't that popular, but it was obviously exciting music, an exciting time to be in the UK. But they got so irreverent that it kind of like the writers in some ways were the stars more than the music. And that seems like also they rarely gave anyone 3 good reviews in a row. It doesn't matter who it was. And it just became this sort of like a dead end in a way, from what I could tell. I mean, I read some stuff online, but in the US, it would and Rolling Stone, was like the Bible in some ways. I have a red Rolling Stone record guide that I would say, which Otis Redding album should I buy? Which, Rolling Stones album should I buy? And I would, or reggae, or, Toots and the Maytals, or, Burning Spear, whatever. I would just buy them because you couldn't hear them anywhere. This was before the internet, as we like to say, people our age. Right. And I think in Rolling Stone, around the time in 78, when, and 79, when Dave Marsh gave the Rolling Stones, I was at the show. Rolling Stones were in Philadelphia on a tour, and there was a riot afterwards because people just threw bottles because they didn't give an encore, and it gave a bad review. And then I think Jan Wenner had a rebuttal, and I think he also had I think there was some, I don't know, maybe you remember, there was something to do with was it Slow Train Coming, where maybe it didn't, either it didn't get a good review, or he wrote the, what was it?
No, so the first review was a negative review, and 2 weeks later And it was the lead review, as Dylan albums typically were. 2
Mhm.
weeks later, there was another lead review by Jan Wenner, praising it to high heaven.
So to speak.
No, I meant it that way. Yeah, so that's. But you're right; it was the Bible, and I kept up with it on and off, really until just a few months ago. But in the last few years, several times I'd get it, and there was just nothing in it of any value. So as of now, I don't get it anymore. It's just a waste.
Yeah. I mean, now it's like any Mick Jagger solo album gets 5 stars, even though Exile Main Street didn't get 5 stars, that type of thing. And I can understand not getting that album right away, but it's just kind of funny. It's like they don't want to make that mistake again, but I don't think it has the impact. I'm sure. Well, nothing has the impact because nothing really sells because everyone's streaming. A number one record will sell like 5,000 copies or something.
Yeah, but it doesn't have the impact, like you say, in any kind of influence over. It's really more kind of just hitching its wagon to whatever's popular.
Right.
I mean, I got to say, I think Madonna did a lot of great stuff, but at the time I didn't think she did great stuff. And, so when Madonna winds up in the early 80s on the cover of Rolling Stone, to me, that was a travesty. That was horrible. Like, that's not real music. That's not, because it was counterculture for a long time. Throughout the entire 70s, it was counterculture. And then it became mainstream culture. So that's basically what it is.
It didn't really know what to do because, I mean, it was built upon on what happened in the counterculture, and it started in San Francisco in 1967, and the first issue it came with a roach clip, I think. And then they couldn't really champion, like when the Ramones came around, even if they still had to have the legendary Rock and Roll Hall of Fame type acts on the cover in order for it to sell, but it ended up being kind of like a dead end in a way. And then then you have Got Us in the Doorway getting 5 stars. And the thing is, now everyone's a critic, and here we are around podcast, and who thought that would we'd be here X amount of years later with doing all the things that we're doing.
Right.
So I noticed obviously you wrote a book and you curated, I don't know if you curated, but you promoted the Klezmer festivals. There's because rock and roll and other forms of popular music, and your interest in music cut across all sorts of religious beliefs from the artists. There's the Jewish-born Bob Dylan, obviously, and there's Leonard Cohen, and you've given talks about those two. There's Yusuf Islam, aka Cat Stevens, who changed his religion back in whenever the late 70s, early 80s. Seals Crofts, who were followers of the Baha'i faith. Did you ever hear that album, Unborn Child?
Oh yeah.
I remember I think that sort of killed their career. But
it did really damage them.
Yeah. And I never heard. I just saw the album cover and I said, were you crushed? Did you like it?
I was such a fan. I didn't know what to make of that at first. When I remember, it was disturbing, and I didn't agree with the sentiments of the song. But the album as a whole, I thought there was good stuff on it. But you make a good point, which I hadn't really thought of, in that there's this kind of through line. And with Cat Stevens, not even the Yusuf Islam thing kind of was the end of his career as Cat Stevens, but he was a spiritual seeker all throughout. I mean, he had, one of his albums is called Buddha and the Chocolate Box. Buddha. So, and he did an album about numerology and stuff. So you have that. I wrote a book about Dylan's connection, or at least the songs, how they're immersed in Judaism and perhaps Christianity to some extent. Leonard Cohen, as you point out. And, you know, George Harrison was always the Beatle who fascinated me most as a Beatle, and then certainly with his solo career. But, you know, I never consciously connected that to the fact that these were all, in one way or another, let's say, spiritual seekers or spiritual people. So that was pretty cool when you pointed that out. And honestly, don't know what to make of it. I think, I guess in a way, maybe it just reflects something in me that, I mean, you know, I've always been interested in matters of that we can't see and touch, and wondering about the meaning of life and the wisdom of the ages. And so maybe it was natural that I was drawn to them. Although you could probably point to a whole bunch of other things that were spiritual that I didn't like, just because I didn't like them musically. Maybe, I don't know.
Right.
You know, I mean, you know, I was also a huge fan of Elvis Costello and the Clash, and I don't know that you find much of that with them. So it's not like I'm only affected to that kind of thing. But you make a good point.
So that brings us to George Harrison and the book that's still. Is there an estimated publication date?
Yeah. So the estimated pub date right now is fall of 2023, which would a couple of years, and you know, it puts us right about the time of the 60th anniversary of Beatlemania. Really,
is the 60th?
You know,
or is it the 70th?
Hey, that can't be. No, that's impossible. It can't be the 70th because of how old.
Right, 60, right.
So, yeah. So that's the
right when Beatlemania was really exploding. Yeah. And one thing I wanted to say is, if George has seemed to have emerged as he referred to himself and Ringo as economy class Beatles. I always love that expression. But he seems to have the greatest reputation all these years later, and I think a lot of it's based on his spirituality.
Yeah. I think he's, you know, as a person, I mean, taking nothing away from the other Beatles, who, the more and more I listen, the more and more I read and study, the more I appreciate everybody, even John Lennon. And I gotta like give you a shout out, because for many, many years I was somewhat dismissive of the Beatles, and you were very patient with me. You know, I was like, Dylan. That was me. And you were like, but there's the Beatles too, you know. I'm like, but you know, you were always very chill about it, but you never gave up on me, and I really appreciate that. And then you know, things change when it was that box set. I have it right here.
Seth will be right back after this message.
When this thing came out, remember?
Yeah, I remember. I got one as a gift.
So that, you know, I got that, and I really started listening again, and you know, that was the beginning of my newfound appreciation, which has not ever waned, only grows and grows and grows. And you know, I always liked George. I loved his solo songs. You know, I loved the early 70s stuff. All, you know, from obviously All Things Must Pass. I mean, I liked everything. But in particular, you know, I loved this Dark Horse and Living in the Material World and Extra Texture even. And I had 33 1/3, and I played that a lot. So, you know, I mean, you were right, and I appreciate that. And there was just something about George. So what you just said about, I think it's partly because as a human being, I think he's the most fascinating, enigmatic, kind of like, he's a man of many contradictions. As much as he, was very spiritual, he was also very earthy. As much as he preached anti-materialism, he loved fancy sports cars, had a big collection of them, flew around the world to
expensive box
see.
sets.
Yeah. So, and plenty of other personal contradictions, but he's endlessly fascinating.
Mhm.
He was funny. He had this whole other career as a movie executive, which to people who really know about British film say that he basically revived the entire British movie industry in the 1980s, that it was really kind of like just sinking and nothing much was happening. And, through his friendship with Monty Python and Eric Idle in particular, financing the Life of Brian after the financing was pulled, I guess he took out a second mortgage on his home on Friar Park in order to pay for the movie. He could have lost everything. And then, for a decade, maybe oversaw to some extent. I mean, he was Handmade Films, was his production company. So there's that fascination. He was funny. I mean, he obviously, when the greater Monty Python crowd did the mockumentary, The Ruddles, he took part in that. I mean, he was, his whole thing about kind of like, he had a love-hate relationship with the Beatles and what it was. I think in the end he came to terms with it, but I mean, it screwed up all their lives. He saw very early on the dangers that they all faced, the potential violence. It's really striking how he almost like, he foreshadowed what happened to John Lennon, and then ultimately what happened to him. It's insane. I'm referring to, in case viewers don't know, that in the last few years of his life, he was almost killed by an intruder into his home who stabbed him multiple times, and probably hastened his demise. Unfortunately, I mean, he had been ill, but after something like that, I mean, I know Danny Harrison, his son, is on the record as saying that really kind of like was the beginning of the end.
Yeah. And so as I pointed out in the beginning, you wrote the Klezmer book and the Bob Dylan book. And what have you learned from writing two books going into writing this book?
Yeah.
First of all, wait a long time.
Wait a long time. Wait till you're ready, but then do it.
I remember, if I can interject for a second, I remember
sure.
when you were writing the Bob Dylan book, and you were coming to me for different to read over your stuff and whatever, fact check, and I remember you just started writing, I believe, about New Morning, and that once you started writing that, you found your voice, and that led to everything else, and which is kind of like Chronicles, really.
Basically, yeah. Dylan and Chronicles and me and Bob Dylan, it's sort of like the same thing. But yeah, that was a strategy I used just because, I knew I had to start somewhere, and I could have started at the beginning, but that would be boring for me as a writer. And I had, and New Morning in particular, as anybody who's read the book or will read the book, I felt it was a very underappreciated album, and I felt that I found something about that album that really had not been explored before. I mean, some things were more obvious, in terms of their Jewish roots or their Christian roots, or, you know, were overtly biblical in one way or the other. New Morning, I realized something about it. So I just felt like that would be a really comfortable place for me to start and then expand. And I don't remember how the rest of it developed. But, you know, so, I mean, the Klezmer book was the first thing I wrote, and they were all different books. You know, the Klezmer was a lot of research, a lot of listening in order to write the book. The Dylan, I had already done the listening for decades. Although obviously I listened more and more and went through all the songs. It was a lot of research, but it was more of the textual research and the scriptural roots. I'm really in the mid, not quite in the middle of the George Harrison. I'm still, I think, in the early stages, but I'm getting close to the middle. So I'm not sure I haven't gotten to the point that I'm actually, you know, writing chapters and paragraphs and stuff yet. I'm still in a sense researching, listening, interviewing, which I did a lot of interviews for the Klezmer book. I did no interviews for the Dylan book, and remains to be seen how much interviewing I'm going to be doing for the George Harrison book, which is not a biography. So it's not like I'm going to be talking about his life in and of it. I'm not going to find new things, discover new things about his life and interview people who knew him. That's not what I'm interested in. This book is in particular, it's called, as of now, I'm sure the title and subtitle will change, but right now it's Within You, Without You, A Listener's Guide to George Harrison. And it really is oriented very much towards the music and his particular musical contributions to the Beatles, the significance of what he did with them, you know, because, you know, we all know that Lennon and McCartney wrote the lion's share of the songs, and he probably only wrote, I don't know, I guess I should know the number, but I'm guessing between
the best thing to say, he usually had a couple of songs per album. Yeah, that's kind of safe.
Right. So you know, so it's like a couple of dozen tops of the songs that he actually wrote. He sang a few more because sometimes they would toss him a song to sing, and they all sang covers too, and he sang some of them. But losing my train of thought here. So where I'm at, and interview what the book is intended to be, is really intended to be to define both what he contributed to the group in a way that I think hasn't fully been appreciated. I mean, obviously, people greatly appreciate George Harrison, and I don't want to say that I'm, you know, I have to like have something to prove here, right. But I think I do. It is my goal to talk about him in terms that haven't necessarily been termed both within the Beatles and after the Beatles in his solo career, but also music at large and what his influence was, both as not both, because there's more than two, as a guitar player, as a musician in general, because he was more than just a guitar player, he was a musician, as a composer, as an arranger, because a lot of these Lennon and McCartney songs, you know, he did a fair amount. His guitar work in the songs becomes another element of the arrangement of the songs, you know, connects things together, it's punctuation, it's commentary, it's like a call and response in a way. And, you know, he was doing this in a unique way that had never been done before. I mean, he wasn't doing Chuck Berry licks. He wasn't doing blues-based solos to, you know, until you can puke like Eric Clapton has done for more years than we need to count.
I think it was the vaccine that made him puke.
Yeah. he was like an architect in a way, George
Yeah,
Harrison, in the way he created I mean, obviously Lennon and McCartney wrote the melodies and had lots of musical ideas, but George Harrison's scaffolding, his ornamentation, embellishment, can be, and then there's also his musical vision, obviously the whole Indian music thing, which was eventually tied in with this spirituality, but really started as a musical interest of his, just when he was like kind of stunned by the sound of the sitar and wanted to investigate that, and started playing and exploring that and taking lessons and the whole Ravi Shankar thing, going to India to study, and then through being there and through maybe a little bit of Ravi teaching him more that this music cannot totally be divorced from the greater culture, just as we know of any music can't be divorced from the greater culture. Gospel, obviously. I mean, we talk of gospel music, but gospel music is part of something, a greater culture. So these are all things. This is why I wanted to write about George, write about his music, write about the way he saw the world, the way his spirituality tied in with his open-mindedness about other cultures. I could go on and on, but that's going to be the book.
All right. Yeah, and one thing that came to mind was you're talking about gospel, and you're talking about George Harrison, and when he was writing, this is from memory, but I guess when he was writing My Sweet Lord, he went to Billy Preston, who they knew way from Hamburg in '62, and he played with Little Richard and Ray Charles, and he's all over the Beatles recordings from 1969. He asked for advice on how to write a gospel song, because they were from Liverpool and they were exposed to certain music, but not really gospel. And Billy Preston recorded the song before, or released the song before George did. And when George went on tour in '74, he used that Billy Preston arrangement, and he has the big closing number. Yeah, but I guess you and I will talk privately about a lot more about what George's been up to. And so I wanted to discuss the All Things Must Pass album itself. I'm going to geek out and a little nerdy at first, as I warned you early on, because the record company was nice enough to send me the box set, and I wanted to give a little review, personal review of it, and then have you do your take. But I remember in 1970 when it came out, I had an allowance of $1 a week, and it was saving my money. And around that time, I got the Woodstock album, I got this album, I got Elastic Ono Band, John Lennon, and I just saving all my money and getting all this music. And I bought All Things Must Pass before I'd heard My Sweet Lord. It was just George Harrison's record, and I'm getting it. And there are two albums in particular that I remember opening up and being amazed by. One was the White Album, which scared me because I was just a little kid. Nothing made any sense. And the other one was, as many of you have probably seen, there's All Things Must Pass. It was like an opera record, like the golden letters. And I'm not going to show you everything, but it came with nice pastel, I guess, colored sleeves and lyrics, and an orange apple and all that. And it was a lot to take in, but I thought it was great, and I loved everything about the Beatles in those days, and I still do, as you probably guessed. But and I remember when they split up, I wasn't even that upset, because I thought, well, now we got even more music, and especially in the early days, there's like way more music, and that dollar allowance was mostly going to Beatles solo albums and so on. But there's something, before I talk about how awesome their reissues are and everything like that, There's one thing that they've never done. There was it came out in 1970 on various formats. I found this. This is the reel-to-reel, which I've never played because I don't have a reel-to-reel player. But
wow.
I don't know if you can see it, but like most things, it lists they don't separate the Apple Jam from everything else. As most people know, the first 4 sides is the real kind of double album, and then the third album is a bunch of jams. And a CD, when they first started, they were 74 minutes. They got 80, you get like 80 minutes, and they've never put those first 4 sides, those 18 songs on one CD. I mean, I did it back when they had this version. Yeah, the 30th anniversary. Before they had Bluetooth and everything, I made a CD. So I had it in the car, all 18 songs. So I can listen to it in one listening experience, the way whatever being you believe in wanted it to be. And so there's this new set, which is also a beautiful package. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but 50th anniversary. It's got 5 CDs and a Blu-ray. I haven't gotten to the Blu-ray yet because I have the CDs, and it has similar packaging. If you can get the beauty of it, but it has a nice booklet. It's got CDs, but on side 1, on the disc 1, they have a very short side 1 and side 2, and then on the second disc they have side 3 and side 4 and side 5 and side 6, and it's like, why do they do that? I mean, I don't even listen to really CDs anymore. I just put them on my phone and listen to the car. But and they could have put side 1 through 4 on disc 1, side 2 the jams, and there's some jams on disc 5, I think, and they could put that on there. They could have extended those things. So that's something that if anyone's from the record label for the 90th anniversary, they can maybe get that right. But as far as that rant is over, just my particular take on what I particularly loved about this set on CD, aside from the way it looks, is that they're, first of all, anytime the Beatles or anyone does anything, people complain before they even hear it, and they say, "Oh, they don't know what they're doing." And here I am saying, other people, I'm saying the same thing in some ways, but first of all, they remix it, and they're remixing all the Beatles stuff. And sometimes, like for instance, sometimes I even realize where I'm listening to it affects the sound. Sometimes if my head's too close to a speaker, it sounds too digital, but from the middle, it doesn't. If I'm listening in the car, it's different than listening to it at home. But the thing is, you could always listen to previous versions. But there were 2 particular mixes that I found fascinating. One was My Sweet Lord, where I heard the strings, which I never noticed before ever. And God knows how many times I've heard that song. And then there's the ballad of Sir Frankie Crisp, Let It Roll, where they brought up the backing vocals, which I didn't know were there too. So that, and just in general, everything just makes you want to listen to it or it allows you to listen to it with fresh ears. I mean, if this didn't come out, I could probably go the rest of my life without listening to this album that I love, because I've heard it so many times, and there's plenty of other records, and I probably explore a lesser George Harrison album because that's just what I do. But yeah, I mean, so that's was that it? That was my basic thing. The outtakes are great. Some of them have been bootlegged. I mean, there are plenty more out there if people who care. But that's my not so short take on All Things Must Pass. So what? And you must have heard the album. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. So I love it, and I mean, obviously, I just love the album as it was. Songs are amazing. So when I sat down to write about this latest box set with the new mixes, I'm not like against that at all, and I do like to hear stuff that I haven't heard before. And you didn't mention this, but for me, the way when I really want to hear or listen to something, it's with, a pair of decent headphones. And I don't mean AirPods. I mean, over the ear Bose headphones.
Mhm.
That's you just hear stuff that you don't hear. I don't know. Maybe if you have an amazing stereo system, hi-fi, you do hear it. But I've talked to record producers about it, and they all think that, although the stuff was also somewhat mixed so you could hear it on a car radio, right? I mean,
Right.
that was Phil Spector's thing.
Mhm.
It needed to sound good. He would take it out and put it in somehow. I don't know how he did that back in the 60s, what he was listening to,
Yeah.
but it's through the car speaker.
Mhm.
But it's also, when you listen to it through a pretty decent headphones, you hear stuff. So anyway, I did sat down to write about the new box set, and I kind of I stumped myself because I thought, now wait a minute. Yeah, this is All Things Must Pass, and yeah, in some ways it sounds, I don't know if better is the right word, but obviously different. But I mean, we know that George Harrison wasn't thrilled with the level of reverb that Phil Spector put on some of the stuff. So, they've toned it down a little bit, although Phil Spector was very smart the way he recorded stuff so that you couldn't remove very much. I guess digitally now, maybe you could do a little bit more, but there is this thing when you're putting reverb on the recording before it actually hits the tape, you can't undo that. But that's just a little geeky thing. So I stumped myself because I said, now, is this All Things Must Pass now? But how is that possible? How is it possible that the thing we've been listening to for 50 years is no longer the best way to hear something which we loved and which some of us consider one of the, if not the greatest, certainly Beatles solo album, but one of the greatest rock albums of all time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have an answer, so I've never published that because I just couldn't get beyond that. Hopefully, I'll go back to it and I'll find my way through that, or just throw it all out and just talk about the music as it is.
Yeah, it's when these things come out, as I said, the album itself, I might listen to a couple of times, and then, but the outtakes, I'll listen to forever. And
Yes.
I remember the first time when it was the disc was a bootleg called "Beware of Apico." That's one of the improvised lines that George uses in "Beware of Darkness," and they're very stripped down. And when I used to work for a record store, and it's amazing. And my coworker said, "What's it like?" And what came out was, "It's like heaven." I mean, it was just so beautiful and so spiritual and just so stripped down. And it's George and a couple of people, or I don't, I might be confusing things. I'm not even sure that's the one. Some of the stuff is probably solo. I can't remember which ones this is actually. There's too much. I have too many recordings.
So much.
But in any way, because there's also that album Early Takes. But yeah, there's a little. It's just George. It's George at his essence, I guess. And what more could you really want from George? And well, this is what I'm going to get into next. But the Glyn Johns mix of Get Back is has always been one of my favorites. But we'll get into it next. But as I just people, I read things off my phone, so if you see me looking down, that's what's happening. Yeah, I mean, it's saying what is the definitive one, and after a while you realize there's so many problems in the world. It really doesn't matter. I got real problems that I know about.
Yeah.
Just turn the news. It's like, well, the vinyl of 19. I guess the ultimate version of Blonde on Blonde is the mono Canadian promo copy. I don't have that, and I can still enjoy the album. All different, the mono and the stereo and the CD and that whatever. But yeah. So we both agree it's great. And I mean, and I as you said, declaring it, the best the best solo album. I like, for instance, I would be, if it wasn't for this, I'd probably be more likely to listen to like Living the Material World, because it is more stripped down, and I think the songs are basically of the same caliber, even though they're probably not. That's what I think. But anyway, so speaking of George and the Beatles and Get Back and all that, so that's coming up. Have you gotten that box set? I haven't gotten it yet. The Get Back.
Yes.
The Let It Be
I
box
did.
set. Yeah. So what do you think of it?
Yeah. I love it. Yeah. Hare Krishna. No, I think it's terrific, and it's fun, and I like the talk. Obviously, the studio chatter. I do like the Glyn Johns version. You're just hearing stuff that you didn't hear before, but that's there. That was always there. And we know that was the way it came out after Phil Spector took the tapes and did his thing to it, was controversial. I mean, the Beatles, most of the Beatles themselves had issues with it, but then again, we used to listen to Let It Be all the time, and we loved it, right?
Right.
We loved it the way it was. So there again, it's like, well, is this really the way they meant it to be? Who knows? I mean, this is what they put out. I mean, they could have said no, right?
It's
even
by
that point,
right. It's even more of a conundrum than All Things Must Pass. It's even All Things Must Pass. You're wondering what the real one is. Like Let It Be, Get Back. Now you're really getting into deep, hot water. My battery's running low. I'm gonna plug you in there. Okay. My own personal thing was, as I told you, I got the White Album and it scared me. And then, but by the next spring they put out Get Back, and there was a little article about them playing on the roof in TV Guide, and they became my favorite group again. And in the summer, as you know, my family, my mother's side of the family is from Belgium, and that's where we spent the summer. My father was in Brussels, found a Beatles Monthly. The only issue I have is from the day, and it went into detail about what the Glyn Johns album was going to be, track by track. And let's say it was July '69 or whenever it was. And waiting when you're that age for anything, but it didn't come out to the following May. And I remember when the Get Back single came out, my father said, well, save your 69 cents plus 3 cents tax, because it's going to be on their next album and you'll have it soon enough. And now I have like 23 versions probably, but my father would go shopping. You remember my father? He would go to every Thursday. I would go to Corvettes and Sam Goody, and I would give him a list of if I wanted anything. And on top was at first Get Back, and then it was Let It Be, and finally I remember he brought it home and surprised me and played it on. I heard I Dig a Pygmy coming down the stairs, and finally, and if I can be even more self-indulgent here, but I remember I'd look at the single and say Get Back is 3 minutes and 11 seconds, and I'm looking at the vinyl Beatles Let It Be album, it said 3 minutes and 9 seconds. I was like, oh, and then it's that whole ending's cut off and there's a new beginning, and it was just like I'm waiting like a year and a half for this thing to come out, or not a year and a half, but almost a year for it to come out, and it didn't even have the whole song. But when I heard the Glyn Johns thing, as you said, it's just them. The same reason I like the George Harrison demos. It's just I'm not a big fan of a lot of production, but George Martin is an exception. I love his production, and I have no complaints about anything he's done, especially with the Beatles. But too bad he didn't work with Seals and Crofts, though. That would have been good. And as you know, those whole sessions, George's frustration at the Get Back sessions was because he was hanging out with Dylan and the band in Woodstock, Thanksgiving '68, and they wrote some songs together. And of course, there is on the Nothing Is Real podcast, Jason said that George got Bob Dylan in the divorce.
You just reminded me of something. So for years, I think, since All Things Must Pass came out, there's always been a sentence or two saying that it somehow reflected George's time spent with the band and Dylan, obviously, because he's got a couple of Dylan songs or co-writes on it. And other than the obvious Dylan song and the co-write, the thing about the band, it was like, okay, maybe, I don't really know. But the version of All Things Must Pass on the new box set, the box set is called Let It Be, right?
Yep.
Or is it Get? Yeah.
No, it's Let It Be.
That version, even more than on the All Things Must Pass album, but on the Beatles performing that song, that really that shows you the connection to the band, especially in the vocals. They sound just like Rick Danko and Levon and Richard harmonizing together. It was astounding to me when I heard that All Things Must Pass from Get Back, Let It Be. So then I thought, oh yeah, now I see the connection to the band, and even the music, even the way they played the laid back, funky, semi-acoustic, rootsy sound, I think is stronger performed by the Beatles than it actually was by George and his band for All Things Must Pass. Did you notice this, or are you going to go back and listen to it now? And
I think, well, did I notice it? Well, I think I read about it, so I had it in mind already. But I think even, again, there's so many bootlegs and stuff, I can't remember what's what. But I think he says doesn't he say he wants one of the songs to be more like the band? Was that the one, or?
He says it should be bandy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's telling the Beatles that.
Yeah.
So this is, before All Things Must Pass. He's already got that in mind. And they did it more bandy, capital B, than it was on George's solo album.
Yeah.
The Beatles actually, for that one track, sound like the band. And that's like, wow. Clearly it wasn't only George was listening to the band. They all were.
And on the stuff that didn't make it onto the box set, they're covering some band songs, and I don't actually, well, it's basement tape songs anyway, and I don't know if you heard that stuff, but yeah, it's Dylan songs. I mean, not particularly well thought out things, but they're just little just little snippets of songs, whatever, for fun. Now, are you going to get Apple TV and watch the Beatles Get Back thing?
Wait, I have Apple TV.
No, Disney.
Disney TV.
Yeah.
I don't have, and of course I'm going to get it for
a month,
a certain period of time, so I can. But we still don't know. What it's going to be like. Is it appointment TV, or if you miss it, like, will they never show it again?
I know.
We really don't know what the deal is, do we?
No, and I'm busy 2 of those nights. So I can't imagine they'll just show it once and not show it again. But I don't know. And I don't have a DVR thing. So,
well, the other thing, we also assume that sometime in the next year, they will issue it on,
Blu-ray and all
well,
that,
but I don't have a Blu-ray player.
or a CD. Well, you can probably get CD or Blu-ray. Do you have
But
any player?
DVD. Well, I have a DVD.
Yeah, they'll probably have your options. Or spend $40 and on top of it and get a Blu-ray player.
Is that all it costs?
Well, I think the
$40?
one I got, I believe, was $40. Yeah,
Because all these box sets have
Blu-rays.
a Blu-ray disc on it, and you can't do anything with it unless you have a Blu-ray player.
Right,
But like,
right.
How many things can you have?
Well, we'll find out. Hopefully we'll live long enough to find out whatever the next thing is. But actually, physical things are going down the tubes anyway. It's all going to be on computers. So
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I guess they're even still working, or they're still working on the Get Back thing. Wow. Well, maybe by now they're done, but they were. It's next month. And let's bring things to a close by talking about what Bob Dylan's up to these days. He obviously had Rough and Rowdy Ways, and I thought that's already old news, I guess, but we both separately came up with the theory or observation or whatever that in some ways the album was his acceptance speech for his Nobel Prize thing. I don't know if anyone else got into it. Actually, I think I only read two other reviews, because by the time I was done, I couldn't possibly read another word. But you had a great review, and as you know, I always like your writing, and going back to the Beatles. Back in 2002, you wrote the best review of the Paul McCartney 2002 tour. I don't remember the specifics, but you talked about it as a lonely figure on stage, and it just really put it in perspective. So little kudos there. I don't know if it's online somewhere, but anyway, so there's that. You had the Shadow Kingdom, which I don't know if you ever watched it a second time, and
I did not. No.
And he has the bootleg series with George Harrison. They had that thing with the 1970 George Harrison. So there's a lot of stuff coming out. There's the Springtime in New York. So just thoughts about Bob Dylan at this time in his career, and nothing heavy.
Yeah.
But obviously there was something about Paul McCartney on some news station. Someone watched Paul McCartney watch the Get Back special on Long Island, or wherever it was, and why didn't we ever run into him on Long Island, or John Lennon at the Islip Airport? But they was talking, and he did make the comparison that about Paul McCartney in the last 40 years or 40 50 years, but he did say that it's nothing compared to Bob Dylan and what he's been doing, and as an artist. And I thought, like when he put out Time Out of Mind, I thought that was groundbreaking. Although he's so used to being a groundbreaking artist, it doesn't have the same impact, because when it's almost like it's more like disappointing when he's not groundbreaking. Whenever he does something, like that last album, just explored even new territories, especially with Murder Most Foul. So there's all this stuff going on. So Bob Dylan, 2021, about to go on tour, so if everything goes well. What are your thoughts?
It's just amazing. It's unprecedented that he's 80 years old and he's still. The album, the Shadow Kingdom, whatever you thought about it. It was a new creative thing with new musicians. We don't know who the band is going to be on tour, do we?
No, there seems to be, they're kind of scattered. Tony Garnier is on some sort of tour.
Right.
I don't know if it's Asleep at the Wheel. Charlie Sexton is playing with Elvis Costello right now, but he's like an auxiliary member. He was like a fill-in for, I think, Steve Naive, but I guess they're still carrying on.
Yeah.
drummer. There was someone online said it was some other guy's gonna be the drummer. That's, what is it? Maybe I'll just come out with an acoustic guitar and harmonica. I don't know.
Well, I actually, I mean,
Wait, you're available, is what you're saying?
I am available, but I've long wished that Dylan, what was great about Dylan, I mean, many things were great about Dylan, but as we mentioned earlier, especially in the 70s, but even throughout the 80s, every tour was totally different, totally different musicians, or mostly different musicians, different arrangements, entirely different styles. And, as fascinating as the Never Ending Tour was, frankly, it got, I mean, and he himself was amazing. I mean, so many of the shows I went to where he was just, I mean, I felt like the electricity running through me. But I also kind of wish that he would shake it up a little bit. So, maybe with a new band, he will. Arrangement wise, sound, aesthetically. But yeah, I mean, did any of us ever imagine that he would still be doing this? No, of course not. At this age, for this long, it's unprecedented at the level that he does it. And, every day that Bob Dylan is with us that alone makes it somewhat of a good day, as opposed to the opposite.
Right. He's right. I mean, it's amazing to be living in a time, and us, particularly for us, to start, as you said, not during the first great era, but certainly the second great era, and to follow the trajectory of his career over all these years, and through the good times and the times that we thought were not so good times, but then we reevaluated and realized those are really good times too. Yeah. So and here we are, and you've written a book about him, and I have a book out about him too. And
who would have thought that from Islip, Long Island, would come 2 books about Bob Dylan by 2 different Islip High School grads, like within a grade of each other.
Right.
I mean, that's almost as amazing as Bob Dylan being 80 years old and still making albums. I mean, really, if you think about it, probably the only person perhaps more well-known in the world than you or I from Islip is Tommy Verizon.
I don't know who that is.
Exactly my point. He was a baseball player, a major league baseball player. I don't think he ever became really well known or successful, but in Iceland it was a big deal that
Well, Scott Wormuth is originally from that area too, but I don't know exactly where. I know Comac and that kind of area.
Not Iceland.
No, I thought. Well, anyway, I can't speak for Scott. I can't remember all this stuff anymore.
Well, if he's from Iceland, then then we need to do something about it. That would just blow my mind. He's actually from Islip, like us.
All right. Well, so we can expect a George Harrison book for you, hopefully in 2 years' time.
Couple of years. Yep.
Yep. And I know you've done plenty, especially during the pandemic, plenty of things online talking about everybody, Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen.
Leonard Cohen, protest music of the 1960s. Yeah.
So is there anything coming up at this time?
Yes, I've got more. I'm doing a talk on Sunday night. I'm doing my Bob Dylan talk.
All right.
Online.
Actually, I don't know if this will be up in time, but when is it? On Sunday, you said?
This coming Sunday, October
Halloween?
31st. Is Halloween October 31st?
Yep. You'll have your Bob Dylan mask on.
Very good. Yes.
All right. Well, All right. Well, either you'll see this and will it be archived, or is it just one of those?
I don't even know at this. I do these things so often. It's hard
It's
to
a
keep
blur.
track of
Yeah.
like. It's what's cool about this one. It doesn't make a difference because it's online and
Right.
it's but the presenting organization is in Southern California, so that's like, oh, that's pretty cool. I haven't been presented by Southern California. I presented by Montreal and Toronto and London, places you'd expect, but Southern California, that's pretty cool.
Maybe you'll get a
I hope
tan
it'll
while
be
you're
warm. It'll be warm that night here in Hudson, New York.
All right. So before I forget, I just wanted to thank you for including me in some of your in some of the things you did, including a talk we had, a two-part talk. God knows when it was, a few months back. And I will include in the blog that goes with this how to get in touch with the Rogovoy report and Twitter and Facebook and
great
how to buy the books and the Dylan Profit. I'll go over with you so I don't leave anything out. So anyone who wants to explore any of this stuff, they can. And all right, and thank you for this. I've had a great time. It's always great talking to you, Seth, as you know. I always enjoy talking to you. And say hello to Linda, the kids, the Kiki, and I guess it's time for our boot heels to be a wandering.
Hare Krishna.